All right. Hi, I'm Eric. I work at IFT, or If This Then That. We build the data layer for the internet to transfer data and your services as a neutral party across the internet. Check us out on the App Store, and of course we're hiring, like everybody. We're going to be talking about RecyclerView's powerful companions, Diffutil, SnapHelper, and ItemTouchListener. These are APIs that maybe you use in like one piece or another, but they're APIs that are not necessarily built into RecyclerView, but are, like I said, companions in that you attach them and they add basic characteristics like drag listeners and touch listeners onto RecyclerView and implement a lot of the complex behavior for you. So, quick refresher, we're going to talk about Diffutil first. There's a lot of info to cover, so I'm going to go over a lot of it kind of fast. But I want to put in Diffutil first because it's the most exciting. So I want to get over it. I want to get to it first. List view and grid view, back in the days before RecyclerView, when we had new data coming in, we just really had this notify data set changed method, and you would call it on your adapter, and you wouldn't really have any animations unless you did anything clever. Your data would just all completely rebind. Everything in the view would rebind, and new data would show up or not. And that was the way it was for a long time. And then RecyclerView came along, and RecyclerView's adapter gives us these notify methods: notify item range changed, notify item inserted, removed, and moved. And for the range ones, there are utility methods, of course, for single points. And in notify item range changed, this is, I'm kind of reiterating this stuff because for emphasis, as it'll come in handy later. Notify item range change is not a structural event. It's just your data to rebind. So this is like when you have your timestamp update on your view in your list, and you just need to rebind the data. It's not moving anywhere in your list. You just want the onbind view called to your adapter again. If you can partially rebind, RecyclerView also supports this. So in the example of having maybe a timestamp like this item last updated 6 minutes ago, then you rebind and now it's updated 8 minutes ago. Instead of completely rebinding, like in the days of ListView, then you can rebind with a payload, and you can just update. You can signal to your onbind view to just update one field, so you're not reloading your image or reloading a bunch of data from the database to update the entire view, just the pieces that you want that you're signaling to your adapter about. The other methods, the other notify methods, are structural changes. So this is where you'll see your views move about in your UI, and when you're scrolling and you've loaded more content down at the bottom, you've added. When you've dismissed something, you remove them, and these will be structural UI events, not just updating the UI. Animations, again, back in ListView days, we just had notify dataset change. We didn't really have any animations without building them ourselves. In RecyclerView, if you just use notify dataset change, it still exists. It's almost never what you want. And if you use it, you're not going to get any animations by default. You're still going to be stuck with just complete rebind. And there was, for a long time, before Diffutil came along, and we wanted to calculate all of the inserted and removed and moved calls, you could call notify dataset change, and if you overrode in your adapter and said has stable IDs, and get item ID, of course, returned a unique ID for all of your items in your data set, then you could get animations, but they wouldn't be predictive animations. So when views are coming in from off the screen where they're not already currently on the screen, they wouldn't have the correct animations. So it wasn't the perfect solution, but it was kind of a best effort solution if you had lots of complex data that changed rather than just appending to a list or something. So Diffutil's API. The first thing you'll notice in Diffutil's API is Diffutil.callback. This is not really a callback, like it's not you should do something when this method is called. It's more of a provider. It's more providing information to Diffutil so that Diffutil knows how to calculate the diff in your data sets. The first two methods, pretty self-explanatory. Get new list size, get old list size. Pretty self-explanatory on how to implement that. The interesting parts come in. Are items the same? This is for those structural changes. This is for when items are removed, added, and moved. This, I kind of provide an example. I see sometimes this gets a little bit misused, but this is like basically when your ID has changed. Your ID is the same, so the item is still the same. I still have the same piece of information, but something's changed, but it's changed in the structure. It's just moved around in position. Our content's the same is for that data change, so that would be where your timestamp is changed, for example. So this would be like if your old post is equal to your new post. Is it did a field on your post change? Did the timestamp change? Did the text change? Did the user image change? Those types of things. And it means that you should rebind your data. It's not just moving in your adapter set. Get change payload on top of that. So again, you can still implement partial rebinding even when you're using Diffutil. Just override the option. You can optionally override get change payload and provide the proper diff. So here's kind of the graph of like what this looks like. So our content's the same. Only makes sense. It's only called when our item's the same because that's the only time it makes sense. The items certainly, the contents aren't going to be the same if the items themselves, their IDs aren't the same. And then of course, get change payload. If the contents aren't the same, what's the diff? So you don't really. It's just a good mental model for how the Diffutil will call through to these APIs, to these providers in your callback. So the actual API is calculate diff. There's the optional detect moves, which is by default true. So there's a single parameter and a default and a double parameter API for calculate diff. Detect moves is true by default. But if you don't need to detect movement within your data changes, then consider changing this to false because you can actually save a lot of computation time. It's actually an additional O of n squared, where n is your items in your data set, calculation to repass over your data set to check for movement, to check for the movement in your data sets. And so this is where you'll actually dispatch the changes. So you'll calculate the result, you'll get the result, and then the result is basically a piece of data. It just knows where the changes are in your two data sets, and then you want to actually dispatch this to something. So you dispatch it to a list update callback, and this is really an actual callback. It means you need to do something with this data. And so you'll see on this callback you have onChanged, onSorted, onRemoved, and onMoved, and these all accept data ranges from a start and then to a certain count. So those look really familiar. They look exactly like our adapter methods. So Diffutil provides a convenience method for this, just to dispatch directly to the adapter. The implementation, of course, is trivial. It just it just implements the adapter methods there. This is something that I kind of see sometimes when people implement Diffutil. They kind of, it's a little bit tricky to remember the order of your operations. So when you're calculating the diff, you're just calculating that piece of data. The diff result is really just that piece of data. There's no, you haven't changed your adapter, you haven't changed your data sets. And then sometimes I'll see code that actually dispatches then to the adapter before the backing data is actually changed. In a good case, this will actually crash. The adapter will say, whoa, the data is mismatched here. In the bad case, there'll be subtle bugs, and you won't. It'll be hard to see why didn't my data change. So make sure that your data, your backing data for your adapter, has actually changed when you're going to dispatch to the adapter to call in those notify item moved and notify item inserted and removed and changed methods. So this can be, Diffutil can be kind of computationally expensive for very large data sets. So measure this and see if it's worth pulling off the UI thread. I think it's kind of rare. It's pretty fast, but if you've measured and you need it to be off the UI thread, you got to make sure not to change your data set as you're calculating this. So if new data has come in, you got to be careful of a race condition where your backing data set has changed, but you're still calculating the diff, and now your data set is incorrectly reporting to your to diffutil.calculateDiff. So the thing is, like, if you can avoid it, do, because it's always nice to have the UI thread be the boss. And so here's a case in our app where we use it. We actually use this for almost all of our lists and grids. And the nice thing about this is that it's so little code. Before this, we had kind of some hacks. We did some of the stable IDs, and we had some where we would try to calculate where items moved, but it was grossly inefficient. It was always O of n squared time. We always had to make another pass over data. Diffutil wraps this up in a nice API, and you don't have to worry about a lot of the complexity in the math for there. So SnapHelper API, really fast. If you've ever seen the Google Play Store do this, or Google Play Books, a lot of intro pages do this. It's a super simple API. There's not much to say about it. The SnapHelper is an abstract class, and I just want to highlight it. You can snap directly onto views, but more importantly are the concrete implementations that I'll go over in just a minute. This also follows the similar pattern as I was saying. It attaches to RecyclerView, so RecyclerView doesn't actually know anything about this class. That's the nice part about these helper APIs, is RecyclerView is completely agnostic. This just attaches to your RecyclerView and adds on the correct drag listeners and scroll listeners, and then implements the correct behavior there. So the implementations, the common one is linear SnapHelper, super simple, snaps to the center view by default. You can override find snap view, and it gives you your layout manager to change it. If you're using a linear layout manager, super simple to say find the first view that's visible, and then you can just return that in the find snap view and snap to your first view if you don't want to do the center view. And pager SnapHelper, this is kind of a replacement for view pager. I would say so the pros are you get recycled views, right? Although that's kind of less of a concern normally because people aren't flinging a view pager normally. So you're not really concerned about the performance of inflating new views. Also, if you're using view pager for anything like a fragment state pager adapter or restoring any view state, obviously RecyclerView doesn't restore view state, so you won't get that in the API. Also, when you're using PagerSnapHelper, make sure that both your RecyclerView and all the RecyclerView's children that the adapter creates, all both their width and their height are match parent. Otherwise, SnapHelper won't behave correctly. ItemTouchListener. This is back to the ListView days. I think this was I pulled this off one of Chet's dev bytes from maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And we had all of this calculation with ViewTreeObserver and setting the transient state and resetting the transient state, all to support swiping to dismiss or dragging and dropping. And then you had to consider, okay, what about the empty states? And what happens when my list is removed? I need to destroy these callbacks and remove the ViewTreeObservers. So a lot of complexity. Now, ItemTouchHelper just does this with RecyclerView's TouchListener callback APIs anyway. So ItemTouchHelper is actually just an on ItemTouchList, or it's actually just an item decoration and has a field for on ItemTouchListener. So it interacts with both these APIs that are already API standard on RecyclerView. So again, we have this pattern where the main API you implement and interact with ItemTouchListener is called the ItemTouchHelper callback. So we can compose these drag and swipe flags, make use of the make movement flags. It's a convenience method for telling the callback which flags you support, and for dragging and dropping or swiping and swiping left or right. And on move, remember again to update. Again, all this complexity is hidden from you. You can just get these easy callbacks, but you do have to remember that these don't know about your adapter, and you do need to update your adapter with the changes that happen. If you're moving, dragging, and dropping, where do these things move? And supporting dragging, super easy. If you there's already a built-in API for Longpressing. You can just return true here. It's actually by default it returns true, so you don't even have to override this if you don't want. You can return false if you want to override it. Also handy is the start dragging. Is the start drag API. So if you have an app like maybe Google Music where you have a list where you kind of have an affordance, a handlebar where you might want to start dragging, you can implement that, and you just pass in the view holder of the item that you actually want to move there. And then that begins the movement callbacks for you. So also for dragging, another super handy API and kind of a common use case is CanDrag. So this is in our apps we've had header views, and now we can just check for, okay, is this item view on this view holder our header view, and just return true there. Or maybe you're updating, you have some progress, and you need to return false and say, I can't drop onto this view. And remember to update your adapter when you swipe, of course. So swiping, again, similar APIs here. Instead of on move, you just have on swipe. And if you've swiped and you've successfully dismissed something, again, your callback doesn't know about your adapter. You need to tell your adapter about the change. Support swiping. This is, again, convenience API is swipe enabled. Normally you want to return true. By default, it's true. But also you have the manual API where you can say start swipe. So if there's like a handlebar, some kind of affordance on your view, you just tell the helper, hey, this view holder with this view can start swiping now. So these are kind of common use cases. This also provides the attach state. so we can know, are we idle, are we swiping, or are we dragging? Because dragging and swiping actually tend to be very different movements for very different use cases. But yeah, you can, it's as simple as just animating on your view right there, and you don't have to worry about state management for your different views within your recycler view. I don't want to read off the API that everybody can read, but want to highlight some of these. You can also change the velocity easily. You can change the threshold for when you want to start a swipe. You can change the box, so maybe your list items are very small, and you want to increase the touch visibility for them. Pretty easy to do. It's all there. Again, just methods you can override on this callback API. So ItemTouchHelper is just an item decoration, and you can also override on the callback on child draw over. But the nice part is, rather than just a normal item decoration, you get the action state. So you know if you're dragging or if you're swiping, and you can provide maybe a red state that the item is about to be deleted as it's being swiped. So here's a simple fading example. Again, no state management involved. We can just start swiping, and we start increasing the alpha or decreasing the alpha as we near the edge of the width of the item as it's being dragged off the screen. For custom layout managers, all you have to do is kind of a rare case, but you can just implement view drop handler on this. This is another API, and it just has one method prepared for drop. And if your layout manager just implements view drop handler, your callback will just actually do an instance of check for this type, and will call prepare for drop automatically on you whenever on move starts. So when you're swiping or dragging, you'll get these calls without having to do anything, but just implement view drop holder on your custom layout manager. And that's it. So yeah, super excited about Diffutil, super excited about removing boilerplate in our apps, and getting those efficient results in our pretty UIs. Any questions?
Do you have any recommendations if you wanted to drag multiple items in a recycler view at once?
Yeah. It's not a use case I've come upon. I don't have anything off the top of my head. Yeah. Thank you.